What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, September 15th, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And, of course, in hour number 3 today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. Now, as you probably have already heard, there was a bit of a terror attack in London on a rush hour train, what they're calling a bucket bomb. And it looks like it wasn't all that powerful. It injured 22 people, no fatalities. And none of the injured are considered in a life-threatening condition. Looking at the photo of the remains of the bomb, it looks more like a deflagration than a detonation. So it was hastily put together, and it was a little more really than a firework here. But I guess somebody decided they needed to counter all the recent stories about how the U.S. is assisting al-Qaeda in Syria, how they're airlifting out the ISIS commanders so that the Syrian army can't capture them, and how the Pentagon is still sending weapons into these anti-Assad forces. And, of course, that gets everybody saying, well, whose side is the U.S. really on? And so now they're reselling the idea, al-Qaeda bad, just that's all you need to know. And, of course, it also drove the aftermath of North Korea's recent missile test firing off of the corporate media here. Apparently, Donald Trump is out there making remarks at Joint Base Andrews. He's doing a lot of speechifying for a sitting president, and I guess that's the part that he really likes best of all here. Now, there is a manhunt underway. They spotted a suspect that they think planted that bucket bomb on the closed-circuit TV system that they have, and but so far I haven't heard that they've caught him or released his identity here. Donald Trump has seized on this London tube explosion to say, and I'm not kidding you, this is over in the independent Great Britain, Donald Trump says the internet must be cut off to stop further terror attacks. And basically he said the internet was a terrorist recruiting tool, and loser terrorists must be dealt with in a much tougher manner. The internet is their main recruitment tool, which we must cut off and use better, which sounds alarmingly like censorship. And unfortunately, because of all the monitoring on the internet, I don't think terrorists are being recruited on the internet, because otherwise they'd prevent all these terror attacks. But it is very alarming to hear Donald Trump talk about needing to control the internet here, because I wish Trump would remember it was the internet, and specifically the independent media, which is why he is sitting in the Oval Office instead of Hillary Clinton. Now, speaking of Hillary Clinton, she's still out there on her Sour Grapes tour, and the book sales are not doing well, even though they've already been discounted 40%. And I'm looking at this article here from Patriot Rising, What Happened Hillary, saying that the idea of forking over $20 or so on 500 pages from the worst presidential candidate in modern history, blaming everyone but her wardrobe assistants for her humiliating defeat, seems sillier than thinking that dressing like Dr. Evil's older sister will resonate with people who buy their clothes at Walmart, which is a rather interesting turn of phrase. But basically, Hillary is still drawing in the people who are part of her personality cult, who see her as a divine figure, who worship her, who don't think about what's really going on. They just want to bathe in the presence of their goddess. And they're the ones who are buying the books and showing up at these book signings. Along with the inevitable protesters who are out there saying just what did happen to Vince Foster, for which they will be rather forcefully ejected. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is still out there pointing the finger of blame at everybody for her defeat, and blasts the New York Times news coverage as being schizophrenic, because she is saying the New York Times endorsed her campaign, then they turned around and reported on the email scandal. Apparently, in Hillary's mind, If you are supporting her, you don't talk about the negative things that she's done. But the email scandal was very real, and again, it was all over the independent media, and at some point the corporate media had to pick up on it, or it became obvious they were trying to protect Hillary Clinton. Now, Judicial Watch has, the State Department has released another 1,600 new pages of Hillary Clinton's email that continue to prove that there was a pay-for-play scheme at the State Department. And Judicial Watch is saying these emails reveal the Clinton Foundation friends, meaning donors, receiving favors from the Department of State, along with the security breaches and the possible espionage, and Mueller and Sessions and all of them. They're still absolutely dedicated to the proposition that they are not going to look into any of Hillary's crimes. They're still out there trying to find something they can go after Trump with. And it's becoming very, very obvious that the swamp is, in fact, very real. We have our second Attorney General in a row, our second Director of the FBI in a row, who are absolutely ignoring the obvious evidence of serious crimes committed by Hillary Clinton while they continue to flog this issue about Russia-Trump collusion, and they keep coming up short on that. And everybody is noticing it now. Everybody is realizing there is something weird going on. Because remember, in that TV press conference James Comey had, he went down the laundry list of the felony violations of Title 18 Hillary Clinton committed. Then he had that lame statement about we're choosing not to prosecute because she didn't intend to do wrong. But if you actually read Title 18, intent is not required. Negligence and carelessness are violations of Title 18. And to be the most generous possible with Hillary, that's what it was. Negligence and carelessness. And yet Title 18 says that is grounds for jail time. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, we've been talking about how the Imran Awan case is heating up because apparently there was a fake server that was turned over to authorities when they were trying to figure out what was going on inside the House of Representatives computer network. And it turns out that the fake server was handed over to authorities not by Imran Awan, but by California's Attorney General Xavier Becerra, who's real big on illegal immigrants and make them all citizens. He's a very hardcore liberal Hillary supporter, and he's considered top Democratic talent. He's a rising star, or was a rising star, but he may now get caught up in this because providing a fake server, faking the evidence, that's obstruction of justice, and that's a serious charge. Meanwhile, over on rickwell.us, there's speculation that the Department of Justice may have to do something about James Comey. Now, what the government is likely going to do, they don't dare touch Hillary or Bill Clinton or any of the Bushes. They don't want to risk revealing that narcocracy at the heart of our government. You know, Hillary knows where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies, but they need to be seen to do something. And so they're looking for somebody a little lower down in the food chain that they can fry up and offer to you as a living sacrifice so they can say, see, we did something. And a lot of people were saying it might be Huma Abedin. Now they're talking about James Comey. And I'm sure people at that level, they have their own dead man switches in place. So Hannity was in this discussion saying that the future of James Comey is definitely dimming. And he quotes Hillary Clinton herself as having been shivved by then FBI Director Comey 3 times over the final 5 months of the campaign. And picking up on the Comey theme, Jay Sekulow points out that the Department of Justice Office of Special Counsel is investigating the former FBI director. Now, this is a different entity from Mueller. Mueller's not investigating Comey. They're friends. Comey worked under Mueller when he was director of the FBI. So a lot of conflicts of interest out there. There are Hatch Act violations in the way Comey worked on Hillary. And again, this is a classic Hillary pattern, blaming everybody else for things she did. If she had not had that private email server with the weak security. If she'd been using the provided secure computers and communication systems for the Department of State, none of this would have happened. But in Hillary's vision, it's okay for her to break the rules and go outside and have weak servers where people can come in and help themselves to American secrets. It was Comey who was wrong for making a stink about it while she was trying to assume her rightful place in the White House. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike, I hope everything's going well for you. I had a solution to this whole DACA problem.
Okay.
If you wanted to hear it. My solution
yes, please, share with us.
To go ahead, I mean, it's 800,000 people, I guess, and I know 40 to 50% of those applicants that were in the DACA program are fraudulent. But I say go ahead and legalize and grant them amnesty, and in return, you stop funding all DACA programs, and you take the 30% that are in our jails. 30% of 2.3 million would be roughly about 700 to 800,000, and deport them. I think that would be a good trade-off.
Well, you've already got half of that because apparently Congress just passed a bill that says membership in a criminal gang like MS-13 will get you deported now. So they're going to start trying to go on out and round up these gang members who've come into the country across the liberals' open borders and at least kick them out right now.
I mean, which I think that's a good thing. But if they really want to let these people in, I say start with the jails, deport them from the jails, and no funding. Let the immigrants, let the illegals, once you grant them amnesty, fend for themselves.
Well, you're absolutely right. And again, everybody who is providing any kind of funding for illegal immigrants is in violation of Title VIII. And we're talking serious fines and serious jail time here. Everybody who's out there helping the illegal immigrants, transporting them around, giving them shelter, giving them jobs, giving them food, they're in violation of Title VIII. All we need to do is enforce the laws that we already have on the books and cut off that financial incentive for them to step across that border in the first place.
100% in agreement with you.
Yeah, because that's why they're coming here. They think they're going to get on welfare. They're going to get all this free stuff from the government, at least out in California. That's the way it's been happening. If we have everybody toe the line on Title VIII, somebody coming up to the border of the United States saying, if I step across the border, I can't get a job, I can't get housing, I can't get transportation, there's going to be no welfare, no social services, I will starve to death if I do this. And that will start turning a lot of those people back. And again, if you want to be fair, have the same immigration policy Mexico has. You can't just walk into Mexico, be given free stuff, get a job, and act like you belong there. If you cross the border with Mexico without the government's permission, you are going to jail or you're going to be kicked back over the border back into the United States.
Or sentenced to hard labor, 6 months to a year hard labor. I mean, I don't understand, you can't, like you said, we can't go to Mexico and if you're pregnant and have your baby, but yet everybody can come here. And to throw this out there at you too, look at our youth. There's Americans here that need help. Why are we helping people that are not supposed to belong here? It's insanity.
That's exactly right. I mean, as long as there is just one American sleeping in an alley and eating out of trash dumpsters, this government has no right to be spending money on people who are here illegally or, for that matter, foreign governments. And unfortunately, most of our government has been caught up in this globalist ideal, and what we're seeing is an attack on our borders, which in turn is an attack on our sovereignty.
Yes, absolutely. Destroy the sovereignty, roll us into one North American Union, and then have people overtop the regions. It's full spectrum dominance, is what it is.
Well, they're trying for that, but again, they're in thrash mode because there are so many people now pushing back. The harder they talk globalism, 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 the more people are standing up and saying, my nation, my nation, my nation, first and foremost.
Absolutely. Well, that was my take on DACA, my suggestion that that we should do. Let them in, and then cut off all funding, and kick out of the the 30% that are illegally in the prisons for the trade-off of letting them into the country?
Well, again, until we can deal with the almost 100 million Americans who are willing and able to work and are unable to find jobs for months, if not years, I don't think we should be letting anybody in to this country unless they're really bringing something special that will benefit our society. I mean, if somebody is, for example, a doctor or a physicist, or they understand manufacturing, skills that are really needed in this country, then yes, let them on in. But just this idea of letting on into our country people who couldn't make it in their own home country, that is suicidal for a nation.
And the other thing, too, this 800,000 that are enrolled in the DACA, they're not the brightest of all immigrants. I'm not saying all of them aren't, but you and I both know that there's no Einsteins in that 800,000. It's the worst of the immigrants.
Well, again, any migration is a filtering process. You're not getting the best representatives of that source country. What you're getting are the people who couldn't make it in those countries. They're fleeing prosecution. They're carrying diseases that they hope they're going to get cured for free by the U.S. government. And so, yeah, what you're getting are basically the low end. Remember when they opened up the U.S. border to Cuban refugees and we were being magnanimous and generous? Castro went down to the Cuban prisons and he took all those prisoners, hardened criminals, and he put them on boats and said, 90 miles that way. If I ever see you again on this island, I will shoot you. And in South Florida, you just had this epidemic of crime and drug dealing and all that stuff that just took off for years after that.
Yep, I understand. Well, you have a great, wonderful show, and I will be listening, and I hope everything goes well, and I hope the best for you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to let you go here. And the phone lines are still open here. Now, do you remember Chris Christie? And there was this big stink where during the New Jersey government shutdown, Chris Christie was photographed with his family on a public beach that was closed to everybody else. And it generated a really big stink. It went viral all over the internet. And Chris Christie is feeling put upon. He basically is saying, I'm the governor, I can do what I want, even if while I tell you you're not allowed to use your own beaches. And he's out there playing for sympathy, saying that Beachgate upset his children. His children have been upset by Beachgate more than anything else since he's been in office. How dare you upset my children by reporting on the crooked and dishonest and unethical things that I do? So I really don't have sympathy for him. It was a tacky thing to do. Now, do you remember Laureate Education? And they got caught up in part of this Clinton Foundation corruption because their CEO, Doug Becker, recruited former President Bill Clinton to basically be a figure at Laureate Education. It was at best a part-time job, and he was paid huge amounts of money for it, $17 million. And now Doug Becker is being forced to step down as the CEO. And I can imagine a lot of people are saying, what's going on over there? Was it more pay for play? It's a semi-legal way of paying back for political favors. And you see more and more of that in politics. In order to hide the corruption, the politician will do something for a special interest group, and then when they are out of office, somehow they get book deals, or they get huge fees for speaking tours, or they get hired by Laureate University for an unrealistically high amount of compensation, and that's how the favors are repaid. And on the face of it, it all looks like it's up and up, but it's just another way of repaying for political favors. And as a result, we have a government that is the finest government money can buy. And the problem is you don't have enough money to be in on the bidding game. So we're going to take a break here for some commercials, I think, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I think Chris Christie's family needs to be worried about his diet because I'm from New Jersey and he's a joke. After Bridgegate, And after, like, that other stunt on the beach.
Beachgate, yeah.
Beachgate, yeah, I mean, come on now. You know, like, enough's enough. And then, you know, he's like a bully.
Yes,
you know,
that's
like,
exactly it.
You know, he throws himself around like he's king number one. You know, he's a Duke of New York, you know. And like everybody else just is subordinate to him, you know, like, but yeah, that's not just him though, Mike. That oligarchy. That's how they think.
Yeah.
You know. Hey, Mike, on you know, I think when I brought this up like a while ago about how one of the reasons why they're letting all the refugees in and the immigrants here is to prop up this dying economic system by, you know, by giving them welfare, and then they get debt, they get credit cards, you know, the debt slavery, and they trying to prop up this, you know, expanding the debt type of thing. You know, one of the reasons why they're bringing all these people in, even though they're, you know, because they got no skills, obviously, so they're not going to really have jobs, per se, so they're all going to be a part of the welfare state in Europe and here, you know, but it's not going to work because, you know, with the BRICS and the, you know, oil for renminbi or gold back, you know, that's all, it's already happening. With Iran and all, the system's already moving away.
Yeah, the rest of the world is already moving away from the Western-centric system, but I'm sure the true believers in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street are convinced we haven't been defeated yet. We just have to come up with a clever idea. But the idea of allowing these people in to get them to be debt slaves is all well and good, but a debt slave is really only useful when they have a job and can make the payments on that debt. And you engineer it so they can never pay their way out of the debt totally, but the whole idea of creating a debt slave is somebody who will work their entire lives and give most of that money to you. That's what a debt slave is. If you have somebody who's coming to the country and they're living off their credit cards and they're running up huge amounts of debt and they don't have a job with which to make payments on the debt, they're not really very useful to the money junkies.
I think they're only useful temporarily because I think, you know, like, this system's finished. They have nothing else to prop it up. I think that was the last-ditch attempt to try to prop up the system by doing this. There's just nowhere else to go. You know, like, I mean, we got $200 trillion in debt. That's with unfunded liabilities, and Europe is messed up. I mean, they're finished. You know, like, it's just the whole Western world, this economic system is just, it's ran its course.
Because for the last 300 years, we've had this parasite on the human race called private central banking, which by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt, so the debt grows and grows and grows and grows until it reaches a point where the entire system comes crashing down, and that's where we are right now. Until somebody starts deciding to just write off the debt, the system is very much in danger.
And this parasite will move on to another host because this host, being the U.S. and the West, is finished as a host.
And actually, this parasite is already sucking on the entire planet Earth. There's only, 3 or 4 countries that are still not slaves to private central banks, and they're all on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list to be eventually conquered. Look at what happened when they went back into Libya. Gaddafi had kicked out the private central bank and started a state central bank. When they went into Libya, the first thing they did was they tore that state bank down and put a brand new private central bank there. One of the reasons they want to invade Iran is Iran refuses to have a private central bank. Being Islamic, they reject the idea of compound interest in favor of a loan plus flat fee form of borrowing, which is less a tool of enslavement. It's a much more realistic way to do it. But these money junkies behind this private central bank scam, they've been at this for 300 years trying to bring the entire world under their control, and they're dangerously, dangerously close.
And if you look at Venezuela, Mike, I mean, they came out. Venezuela is a harder nut to try to, if you can't do a coup, to invade because they're not Libya. You know, but yeah, the system's finished, Mike. It's just, you know, hunker down and hope for the best. You know.
Well,
Thanks, Mike.
plan for the best. Plan for the best. The project, the blueprint for the new America. Dustin, we're going to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the news here and getting on back to that idea that liberals are just incapable of acknowledging their own failings and are instead going to look for somebody to blame. As you probably know, former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner and his wife Huma Abedin are starting the proceedings for a divorce. They've already asked the judge to keep the proceedings private and seal all the records because they don't want the gossip columnists or the paparazzi chasing them around, which makes a little bit of sense. But Weiner, of course, is still facing prosecution for having sexted images of his private parts to an underage girl. And that is just now starting up as well. And amazingly enough, Weiner's lawyer is out there trying to make the case that this 15-year-old girl lured Weiner on because she wanted to influence the national elections. Now, that is pretty pathetic. Talk about blaming the victim. So that's Weiner's defense. I mean, never mind the long history of him doing this kind of behavior with underage girls. But in the one that he's being prosecuted for, it's all her fault. She only lured Weiner on so that she could feel she had an influence on the election. It's utterly ridiculous. Weiner was already disgraced and out of it. Luring him on wasn't going to really change anything at all. If you want to have an influence on the election, start a blog and do talk radio. Because we've had a measurable impact on the politics of last year, which apparently Donald Trump has already conveniently forgotten when he's talking about taking control of the Internet. Now, for those of you still dealing with the storms, Hurricane Irma released 250 million gallons of untreated sewage into the streets of Florida. And it was just, they have not had the money to upgrade their decades-old sewage and water treatment systems, and they collapsed under the impact of the storm. And the other aspect of it, of course, is that they were already overstrained because very few states have got the money right now to expand their infrastructure to keep pace with the growing population. As all these illegal immigrants and refugees pour on in, they're stressing the existing infrastructure to the breaking point. So you toss in a hurricane, and there you go. Now, over in Texas, specifically Houston, all that standing water has prompted a major, major mosquito outbreak. It's almost like the story of Pharaoh and Moses. We got flooding, we got mosquitoes, we got pestilence, we got all this other stuff. And so over the next few days, the United States Air Force Reserve's 910th Airlift Wing is going to be spraying Houston with the deadly insecticide Dibrom using a modified C-130 cargo conversion aircraft equipped with sprayers. Now, this Dibrom is very powerful stuff, and there's no question it will certainly take care of those mosquitoes, but it's also going to wipe out a lot of benign and even useful insect species. You can kiss the butterflies and the honeybees goodbye on this one as well. And amazingly enough, or tragically enough, the National Hurricane Center is reporting on 2 new storm systems forming in the eastern Atlantic. And they're still far away from the United States, but the National Hurricane Center is saying that both of these systems show a 70% probability of becoming tropical depressions within 5 days. We have 3 systems over in the eastern Pacific, which are, one's already a hurricane, the other one's a tropical depression, the other one is sort of still forming up. Luckily for us here in Hawaii, they're all headed different directions. One of them is actually behaving like Jose, just sort of wandering around on its own track here. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Miles in Maine. Aloha, Miles. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Mike. Hey, I just had a quick question for you. I hope you're interested in talking about it. It was information you gave out a couple days back, and you were talking about a vaccination or injection some type of ingredient or material that lowers your immunity to cancers. And I was wondering if you could repeat what the name of that was.
Nagalase. And a lot of these holistic doctors who've died under suspicious circumstances were looking into that. What I'll do is on the next commercial break, I'll hunt that down and post it to whatreallyhappened.com.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks a bunch. Yeah, I always thought that was how coincidental that you had like 18 or 20, 30, I forget how many of these research scientists and everything had died investigating these vaccines and their ingredients and the mutations and various things you bring up continuously about it. But I just always thought, what a strange coincidence, But thank you for that info, and I'm so glad you'll be posting it.
Well, again, all the way back when Richard Nixon was in the White House and he signed the Health Maintenance Organization Act, it basically transformed the medical care from being a service that had strict limits on profit making off of, patients being afraid and not really able to make good decisions, and it turned it into a for-profit operation, and we've seen what has resulted since then. The cost of medical care has just exploded in this country. We have the most expensive medical care on earth, and yet it ranks only 33rd, 34th in quality and efficacy. But it's all driven by money, and so eventually you come to a system that is dependent on the American people being constantly chronically ill and in need of ongoing treatments. If somebody showed up and waved a magic wand, and tomorrow morning every single American woke up perfectly healthy, that entire medical industrial complex would collapse overnight. And so after a while, and it's not like there's a bunch of people in a dark room saying we have to make them sick in order to make more money, but decision making gets biased by that reality that if we just cure them and they go away, then we've lost a revenue stream, so let's just treat the symptoms. And you see the cumulative effect of all those decisions that are biased toward maximization of profit is really what has undermined the quality of our medical system.
Boy, I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. And, when we leave them to unlimited profit, without competition, and this happens to us over and over and over, and it never gets straightened out, it never gets resolved, it just turns into a race for more profit because there are no more checks and balances on the quality, just the profit.
Yeah, that's really what it's all about. And again, we're seeing it with like Obamacare was clearly a giveaway to the health insurance industries. The premiums for our health insurance went way, way up, and so did the deductibles. And for the vast majority of the American people, because of those deductibles, they'll never actually use that health insurance. They'll be paying for their medical care during the year out of their own pocket on top of the premiums for the health insurance, and they'll never reach that deductible. The only way these Obamacare compliant...
Perhaps that's one way of them pushing that medical IRA they were wanting to do as well.
Could very well be, but again, it's all focused on getting the money and manipulating the money and making it grow.
Well, thanks again, Mike, and keep up the great work. It's the awesome show.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the war zones, and there do seem to be so many of them. Coming out of Syria, ISIS is on the run in Deir ez-Zor, and they're backed up by the Russian aerospace forces and the Russian Navy. And basically, it's all over, but they're shouting. More and more people are saying this war is effectively over. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the run, even though the Pentagon is still shipping them weapons. Most of them are saying, we can't win this thing with all the weapons. There aren't enough people. And what's really interesting is apparently the U.S. envoy to the UN has gone up there and saying that the United States will not be satisfied until Syria is stable without Assad. So they're already back to that agenda again. and they're just telegraphing the fact they're going to find some way to reignite the war in Syria and go after Assad, maybe a decapitation strike. And what's going on is they're reacting to all these other countries that are saying, well, given that the U.S. goal was to oust Assad, and that's what was really going on behind all the claims of weapons of mass destruction and, oh, we're really here to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They want regime change in Syria. And now all of a sudden the U.S. is looking at a potential defeat. And they don't want to have the image of a defeat out there because it would seriously impede the continuance of the war agenda. That's why they're pouring more and more people back into Afghanistan. They've been losing there. But they would rather keep the war going perpetually in Afghanistan and Syria because it's not their children being killed, rather than admit that they've actually not done very well in those countries at all. And so now they're up there at the UN again. Nikki Haley's just flapping her gums and saying, we will not be satisfied until we see a solid and stable Syria, and that is not with Assad in place. So they're basically admitting they've gone back to that whole goal of getting rid of Assad and replacing him with a puppet ruler. They're apparently not ready to let that go, no matter how many people have to be killed and crippled for it. Apparently, there was a gunman and suicide car bombers yesterday killed at least 52 people, including Iranians, near the southern Iraq city of Nisariya, in an attack claimed by the Daesh military group. The attackers struck at midday, opening fire on a restaurant before getting into a car and blowing themselves up at a nearby security checkpoint. Now, interesting that they're hammering on this story to say, oh, see, there's Iranians there. The Iranians are part of the problem. If the Iranians would just mind their own business and not interfere with our wars of conquest, everything would be okay. Well, if there's any nation right now that needs to be minding its own business, it's the United States. When you count up all the different countries the U.S. is trying to invade, conquer, regime change, drone strike, or whatever, the United States is clearly the problem here. Now, the agenda is still moving forward to carve a new Kurdistan out of chunks of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And Turkey is already screaming that apparently there is a secret agreement between the Kurdistan regional government and Israel to resettle Jewish Israelis of Kurdish origin in Iraqi Kurdistan following the independence referendum. And some are seeing this as an indication of U.S. support for Kurdish independence. And we know that's been part of the U.S. agenda. And it has nothing to do with the Kurds and independence and everything to do with taking the larger, more powerful nations in the Middle East and breaking them up into little tiny countries that are easy to bully. It's balkanization all over again. Now, the Trump administration is backing a bill that would suspend all U.S. financial assistance to the Palestinian Authority until it ends what critics have described as a long-standing practice of rewarding Palestinians who kill Americans and Israelis. Now, as is the case with most of these stories involving Palestine, you're not getting all the information. Right now, so far, only one American has been killed in a Palestinian knife attack. And the Palestinians who are killing Israelis are usually doing so out of self-defense. But the U.S. support to Palestine, the economic support, was a tiny fraction of what goes to Israel, but was there to keep Palestine stable so that they would be discouraged from having a new intifada. So if you pull that plug and you got a bunch of starving people, this is actually going to escalate the violence. And that may be the plan, so that Israel will have a new justification to go on in there and just blow everything up there in Palestine. Because it does seem like Netanyahu is launching on this, basically the final solution to the Palestinian question. And Israel's government attempted to revoke the residency of Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem on the vague grounds of breach of loyalty. Now remember, when the United Nations first set up Israel, it said Jerusalem was a city that had to be shared, and East Jerusalem was supposed to belong to the Muslims. And just like they did with most of the West Bank, just like they did with the Golan Heights, Israel has come on in and occupied East Jerusalem, and now they're just trying to ship all the people who live there out. And a little bit of a setback, because Israel's High Court, following a 10-year legal battle, ruled that Israel's interior minister did not have the authority to kick Palestinian lawmakers out of the city. And human rights groups are cheering and saying, yes, finally we're starting to see somebody pay attention to the rules over there. But there is this grand plan that Israel is coming out with, a plan to force the Palestinians out of what remains of their homeland. Now remember, all of that part of the world, prior to the creation of Israel, that was all Palestine. And of course, Israel is out there saying there never really was a Palestine. Somebody just made it up. The Jew haters made it up. It was a land without a people for a people without a land. Wonderful piece of propaganda. But as we have illustrated many times, yes, there was a Palestine. It's found on all kinds of maps dating back 1,000 years. It says Palestine. And so ever since Israel was created, the Palestinians are being forced out of their homeland. Now, a prominent Holocaust scholar is looking at this plan and saying it is potentially genocidal, and basically the values look like those that you would have seen coming out of the Nazi SS. Yet the European Union, which claims a moral mission to combat extremism, racism, and xenophobia, is refusing to condemn it. So the EU leadership, like Washington, D.C., is actually a Vichy government ruling their people on the behalf of a foreign master. And I think it's really time that we go back to this idea of a nation should be ruled democratically by its own people and not be ruled from without by foreigners. Because that's Middle Ages Renaissance politics that you're seeing there. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and let's take some phone calls. Chris in St. Petersburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, Michael, a little while ago you mentioned the diabrom that the C-130s are scheduled to spray to combat mosquitoes. That is the larvicide that was being sprayed in Brazil. It also is called NALED, N-A-L-E-D.
Oh, yeah.
And it's we need to stop it because it is documented on the EPA's own fact sheet to cause developmental disorders, including autism and microcephaly.
Swell.
They want to suggest that Zika might cause microcephaly. Well, the mosquitoes that they're trying to kill, the insecticide to kill those mosquitoes certainly does cause microcephaly. And there's also, let me see here, on nospray.org is a good resource for that. But the dibrom also has naphthalene. It's been classified by the EPA as a possible human carcinogen because it caused lung tumors in mice following inhalation. Naphthalene exposure also causes headaches, restlessness, lethargy, nausea, diarrhea, and anemia. Anemia in newborns can be caused by exposure during pregnancy. Let's see. I'm just refreshing my memory as I on hold here, but check out the websites anewsreporter.weebly.com/zika.html, and again nospray.org/NALED, N-A-L-E-D, -insecticide-fact-sheet. And it has a lot more information. So this is something that even though we're debilitated, we need to stop before it gets getting worse.
Yeah, it's the wrong solution to the problem here, clearly. First of all, Zika has been around for at least 60 years, and it never caused microcephalic babies until they blamed it down in Brazil. But the mothers that had had the microcephalic babies had all been part of an experimental vaccine program. And so again, the idea is we got to protect the corporations, we got to protect the money, we got to protect the profits, and people. Well, we've got too many people anyway, and if there are a lot of chronically ill babies born in Texas, well, that's just going to be good for the medical industrial complex. It's more money for them, and that does seem to be the way that they are really thinking. Would you do me a favor and email me those links, because I couldn't transcribe them while you were reading them off, but if you email me those, I will put them up on the website, okay?
All right, we'll do that. So wrh@whatreallyhappened.com.
Yes.
And the Zika virus was sold by LGC Standards, headquartered in the UK, to American Type Culture Collection at atcc.org, which was patented in 1947 by the Rockefeller Foundation. So it's hard to believe that it was just recently discovered to cause microcephaly. If you remember, ATCC, American Type Culture Collection, sold Saddam Hussein his biologicals.
Yes.
So unless they're saying it's a new strain of Zika, which I've never heard anyone claim that it's caused microcephaly, there's no way it could.
No, I don't think so. It's just another lie to protect the corporate interests here. All right, Chris, we're going to let you go. We're going to do a station identification. We've got another phone call waiting on the other side of these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to go back to the phones here. Terry in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you talked about going into Libya and tearing down the banks. Gaddafi had a lot of gold, and he was coming up with a gold-backed dinar.
Yes.
And after the NATO went in and destroyed the country, correct me if I'm wrong, I heard that the U.S. stole all the gold out of the country. Is that true?
Well, there are rumors that it was the United States, but somebody certainly did. I mean, the gold dinar, it wasn't backed by gold. It actually was a card that had a little bit of gold in it and could be used as currency and means of exchange. But yeah, there was a huge amount of gold, and after Gaddafi was killed, nobody could find it. Nobody knows where it went. One of the problems with gold is that you can melt it and recast it, and at that point, any provenance as to where it originally came from is going to be lost.
Right, and I think there was a lot of gold stolen by the U.S. for sure out of Iraq. Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
Remember when they found that tanker truck, and it was like a big, long tanker truck for fuel? And they got in there, and they found the whole thing was just loaded with these big gold bars, lots of them. You remember seeing that?
I remember hearing about it, but again, yeah. I mean, gold is the money of the rulers, and they want to grab as much of it as they can.
Yeah, there's also that story in actually it was Army Times. That talked about that soldier that went in one of those Iraq buildings on a raid, and he found some gold in there, and he took a little piece of it, like a little gold bar or something, and he came back, and he managed to send it home to his wife, and she was able to cash it in, and then the way they caught him is that his spending habits were too lavish. He couldn't wait until he got out of the Army, And I don't know if you remember that story, but they threw the book at him. I mean, they had a court-martial, and they said, you can't steal gold from Iraq. Only we can steal gold from Iraq. So you're going to get court-martialed. They did. They hung him out to dry.
Well, I do know that there was a big stink over the fact that when Saddam's palace was captured, that a lot of those soldiers were prying off the decorations that were made out of gold. Now, I imagine they're very, very thin and not really worth all that much. I don't recall that anything happened to them. But yeah, if you're a soldier, you're not there to go in and pillage the wealth of the defeated country. You're supposed to go on in, kill everybody, and then step to one side while those who sent you to war come on in and grab all the goodies for themselves. Because, as Kissinger just said, you're all just dumb, stupid pawns to be spent for foreign policy. And again, this is an artifact out of that private central bank model. Because there is a point where a nation will be so deep in debt to the private central bank where invading another country and stealing their wealth to pay down their debt becomes a very attractive option.
Yeah, and that's what they've been doing with oil and natural resources, including gold. But where do you think that all that gold is now from Iraq and from Iraq?
No idea.
No
idea. Could be at the New York Fed trying to get enough gold to let Germany have their gold back. I mean, Germany has gotten only part of their gold back, and most alarmingly, it is not the same bars they deposited. These are recast bars, and as it turns out, they're not as pure as the gold that Germany had put in there. Now, these gold depositories are like a bank safety deposit box. When you put something in there and you take it out, it is the exact same object. It's supposed to be. And Germany's gold bars had all kinds of stamps and seals and identifiers on them, and the gold that Germany did get back were just plain blank bars. So it wasn't the same gold that they put on in, or it had been recast with some other metals to reduce its purity. But everybody's trying to grab the gold because when this whole debt-based economic system crashes, that ink and paper stuff is going to be worthless. And I think as they keep talking about the so-called cashless society, we're going to see the U.S. government once again ban ordinary citizens, you hoi polloi, you slaves and serfs. You'll not be allowed to own gold rounds or bars for wealth preservation. You'll be ordered to turn them in, the way Roosevelt did back in 1933. And they'll give you a whole bunch of stacks of ink and paper stuff to compensate you for the gold, and then proceed to inflate the value of that ink and paper away to just basically nothing. It's always set up so that the real wealth of the people in the nation, the real estate, the gold, the hard assets, are always going to flow to the rulers and the money junkies, and you'll be left with a bunch of paper. That's how it's set up to work.
Well, don't you think people are wise to that now, and they saw what happened with Roosevelt? So good luck in collecting that gold from citizens of the United States next time.
Well, I imagine there are a lot of people who are heavily invested into gold where they have taken steps to conceal it. And so obviously, if you are somebody who is buying gold and silver coins, you don't want to mention it to anybody. You don't want to put it out on the internet. You don't want to tell your friends and neighbors, because otherwise you're making yourself a target. And ultimately, in the end, when the ink and paper hoax, when the fiat currency fraud fails, it's the people who have got some portable store of wealth, gold, silver, platinum, tantalum, anything like that. They're still going to have their wealth. Everybody whose wealth was in the ink and paper stuff, it's just going to vanish.
Right, and that includes, bonds and CDs and, stocks, everything else that's, paper, which is most everything.
Well, you're going to have very impressive looking numbers on those brokerage statements, but if we're heading into Zimbabwe-style hyperinflation, where you're walking around with paper notes that say $100 trillion, and yes, that's how bad it got in Zimbabwe, and that $100 trillion note from Zimbabwe was actually worth about 27 cents U.S. So, again, It was an illusion created to make the people of Zimbabwe think that things were prosperous. But the reality is their actual standard of living and their security for the future were being erased. And you know how desperate it's getting here in the United States when you have people like Nancy Pelosi who are out there saying that people who are saving money now are in effect stealing it from the rest of the culture by refusing to spend it. And what a turnaround. When I was a kid, all you'd hear at school was you got to have a savings account. You got to save for a rainy day. You want to put as much of your money away in the bank as you can. And now they're trying to get that. They're trying to get your savings accounts. And if you can't be talked into voluntarily spending that money into circulation, then they passed a bunch of laws saying that your bank can go into your savings account if they hit a crisis, and you can't do a thing about it.
That's why you don't keep money in the bank, right, Mike?
Well, I don't even have enough money to keep it in the bank, but no, I wouldn't keep it in the bank, and... we've been telling our listeners for years now, you should have only as much in the bank as you need to cover your immediate obligations, and the rest you should have in your home under your own control. Buried in a jar out by the pineapple plantation in the backyard. because the laws have also now been changed where if the banks get into another crisis, they can actually start opening the safety deposit boxes and looking for assets of value. The laws have been rewritten to totally protect the banking system, the crooked, corrupt banking system, at the expense of law-abiding, honest Americans.
They might even steal your jewelry out of your safe deposit box if it's gold or silver.
Yes, or if it's got gemstones, anything of any value. In the event of an economic crisis, the bankers are they've got the license from the U.S. government, just help yourself. And that's another reason why they want a cash-free society, so that there can't be a run on the bank. Because as things are now and have been throughout history, if the bank starts getting in trouble, everybody runs on in and says, I'm closing my savings account, give me my money. But in a cashless society, all they're going to say is, we can't give you anything. All we can do is ship it to another financial institution's computers. And all that financial institution's computers can do, they'll just send it back and forth to try and keep the whole system up and running. Frankly, if there is a cashless society imposed on us, and they've already started doing that in India, and it has destroyed the economy over there. You take that little plastic card and you find a reputable, reliable coin or metal store, and you just say, whatever's on this card, I want the equivalent in silver or gold coins. And then you hide them and don't tell anybody that you have them, okay?
So gold coins are better than bars?
No, they're just different forms. They're just different forms of the same material. I mean, you can melt a coin and turn it into a bar, or you can take a bar and strike a coin. Never buy for the numismatic collector's value, because that just comes and goes. It's a matter of fashion. You want to do all your buying of investment metals at the melt value. What is it worth melted down? And that's your real stable indicator. I am seeing way too many commercials on TV that are hawking these sort of goldish coins and saying, these are collector's items. These will be worth a fortune in the future. And no, they won't. They're just another gimmick. And in fact, if you look at how the sports collectibles market just tanked, was going really good. They had all these printed up sports memorabilia, and everybody had to have it in their homes, and then it just crashed on out. Remember, I'm trying to think of the comedian, country western comedian, who talks about his Legends of NASCAR plate collection and how that's going to be his retirement. Jeff somebody. Foxworthy. Thank you. Yeah. Isn't it good to have a wife?
Anyway, Mike, talking about gold that disappeared, what happened to that gold in the bottom of the World Trade Center?
They don't know where that went. I mean, they spent a lot of time in it. There was a lot of gold down there, and they spent a lot of time and money, tunneling down there, and when they got to the vault, it was empty. And there's no record of it.
Another reason for the whole operation.
Yeah, there's no record of it having been removed. But somebody got in there with some trucks and loaded up all that gold and drove off with it just before the buildings were attacked.
Right, and they still can't find it. Well, they're not telling you. And they probably know where it is, but they're not telling us.
Okay, somebody just sent me an article.
Mike, thanks an awful lot. I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
And we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Now let's get on to North Korea, South Korea. As you know, North Korea yesterday fired a test missile. They put it on a true ballistic trajectory. It flew over the Japanese island of Hokkaido. And again, if you look at a map, it's kind of hard for North Korea to test a missile and not have it fly over some part of Japan, because it's just, all over the place there. And it went a really good distance, and they're very pleased with the test. And everybody's, it's horrible, it's a provocation. And again, Russia test fired an ICBM from Plesetsk earlier in the week. Nobody called that a provocation. The U.S. is constantly testing missiles out of Vandenberg or here on Kauai in the Pacific Missile Test Range. Nobody calls that a provocation. But when North Korea does it, oh my goodness, it's a danger and it's a provocation. And meanwhile, South Korea test-fired some ballistic missiles in response to the North's latest test. And nobody's calling that a provocation, because South Korean missiles are good and North Korean missiles are bad, and that's all you really need to know. And that's the part that's really missing. If everybody's worried about a conflict on the Korean Peninsula, they should be denouncing South Korea's saber-rattling along with North Korea's. And I got to tell you, despite his earlier commitment to try and reach across the DMZ to North Korea, now the South Korean president is out there saying, we're going to destroy North Korea. So he has now been co-opted by his military leaders the way Donald Trump has. Now, Lindsey Graham is out there saying the U.S. should threaten military option against North Korea. Well, if you feel that way, Lindsey, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers, and we'll call North Korea and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. Here's the thing. We've been hearing a lot of threats lately. Remember, they were saying, we're going to shoot down any future test missiles that pass over Japan. Have you noticed they didn't do it? And apparently, they didn't even try. Now, part of that may have been this idea that the debris from an intercept would fall down on Japan as well. Or it may be that the only time they're comfortable shooting off one of their missiles is against a test target that has a homing beacon. But we're seeing all this threatened, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, and nothing is being done. And I'm not trying to encourage something to be done. But at the point where Kim Jong-un does appear to have working long-range missiles and deployable nuclear warheads, the game is over. Nobody's going to attack North Korea and risk a nuclear counterstrike. That's the whole reason why North Korea wants nuclear weapons. And now, of course, South Korea is asking Washington, D.C. for nuclear weapons to discourage the North from attacking them. Now, here's the reality. We're never, ever going to get every country on earth to give up their nuclear weapons. We can't even get Israel to officially admit that they have them. So, the only other obvious solution, if you want a world at peace, is every country gets long-range missiles and nuclear weapons, and they just sit on them. And nobody invades anybody out of fear of that retaliatory strike. Probably a lot of you have seen the classic science fiction movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I'm talking about the old black and white one with Michael Rene, not the recent remake with Keanu Reeves that was all about, oh, the Earth is in danger from all of you icky-poo human beings. But in that original Michael Rene version, which was directed by Robert Wise, who I got to work with on the first Star Trek movie, it was really written at a time when the Cold War was really starting to crank up. And the United Nations was trying to get everybody to calm on down. And basically the idea of the script was the only way the Earth will be at peace is if making war leads to the complete devastation of the planet. And even Michael Rene, in his role as Klaatu, is saying, we don't claim the system is perfect, but it does work. So that might be a way to go. If we reach the point where we're tired of having rogue nations invade all over the world, is let's just go to those countries that have a huge surplus of nuclear weapons and missiles and say, can you spare a few for Liechtenstein or for Australia or for wherever? Because in a world where everybody has nuclear weapons, nobody will dare use them. And that's the reality there. We're going to take a phone call. Wes in Idaho, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, are credit unions any better than banks saving your wealth, holding it?
Credit unions have a slightly different set of rules, and most people who've compared them seem to prefer the credit union. The credit union does seem to come from a concept of serving their customer base in the community more than just making a lot of wealth for the bank's owners.
Would you be safe from the government seizing that money there?
Well, no, I don't really know. I mean, ultimately, when the poo hits the fan, the government's just going to go on into everybody's banks. And they're just going to grab everything they can. There'll be confiscation. Apparently, Obama signed an executive order basically saying when there's a national emergency, the government can grab whatever they want from whoever they want, and you can't stop them. And the Red Cross is apparently using this as an excuse to duck the fact that they were caught taking donated items off of church steps and handing them out as if they were their own. Anyway, Wes, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're trying to deal with people who are hacking into the server, and it seems like they've managed to break the chat function, so my apologies to those who wanted to chat with me. Getting on back to the news here, the Pentagon chief is warning North Korea, don't try it, because they're expecting there's going to be another nuclear test. You know, don't try it. It won't work. You can't take us out. No, but they can do a lot of damage. I mean, if you look at how fragile the United States is right now, economically, we're not even sure we have got the economic resilience to recover completely from Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Jose, wherever it's going to come on shore. It wouldn't take that much. We're a very vulnerable nation, and our weapon systems do not seem to really work. We need to be very, very careful about that. On that very theme, apparently out in Camp Pendleton, California, some Marines were involved in a scheduled land-based combat readiness evaluation, and apparently 5 U.S. Marines were killed when their amphibious assault vehicle just spontaneously exploded into flames. Another wonderful creation of the U.S. military-industrial complex. And apparently over in Fort Bragg, there was a training exercise involving demolitions. They had a mishap there. 1 soldier from Massachusetts was killed and 7 others injured. Adding insult to injury, apparently a U.S. Armored Brigade deployed in Poland has lost a portion of the equipment that was delivered as part of the rotation of the military units. A U.S. Army container was broken into while parked at a train station, from which around $55,000 worth of equipment was stolen. And what kind of ammunition or explosives may have gone missing is not being revealed. So it was probably something extraordinarily lethal. And it's not just an American problem. The Royal Navy is a laughingstock. Apparently 3/4 of its warships are out of action. And apparently they can only send 1/4 of its fleet to sea. They're blaming it on spending cuts. And that seems to be the general excuse from the military. Yeah, we messed up. You're not giving us enough money. That's what the Navy is now saying about the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain. That because of funding cuts, they were having to send these ships out in the hands of inexperienced, poorly trained commanders. Well, I'll tell you what. Here's the way it should work. You are a military. You have so many assets. And what you do is you use your assets to make good, effective combat units. You don't just buy up a lot of ships and planes to look really impressive and then skimp on the training. Because you may have more ships and more planes, but they're less effective fighting units, which means you're still going to lose. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yeah, on this deal as far as confiscating the gold, I think it's going to be hard for them to do that because let's say they come and they come to my house and say, hey, we know you bought 10 gold eagles at such and such of a coin shop or something. All you got to tell them is, I lost it in an unfortunate boating accident, in a big lake. They can't prove that that's not true. They can't prove that you didn't get it stolen. You can tell them, I brought some prostitute home. And
you can just say, I was playing poker with the boys, and I was, and I tossed it on the pot, and I lost it, and I don't remember who won that game because I was very, very drunk. And again, if you're going to invest in gold and silver, and by the way, silver is outperforming gold right now. It's a good place to go. And a good way to sort of get your feet wet with silver investing is to go out on YouTube and buy what is called junk silver. These are the pre-1964 U.S. coins that were made of real silver and real nickel and real copper. They have no numismatic value. They're being sold for their melt value plus a small profit for whoever's doing that. And that's a really good way to start building up your silver stockpile. And, of course, they're not really keeping a record of such small purchases. They're only keeping track of people who buy, thousands and thousands of dollars. Don, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, let's talk a little bit about the economic news. According to Moody's, state pension liabilities hit $1.3 trillion. That's a 4.5% increase over the previous fiscal year. Now, the reason the pensions are in trouble goes all the way back to that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, where Wall Street's pet rating agencies, including Moody's, S&P, and all of them, except for Egan-Jones, which has been harassed ever since. They all said, these mortgage-backed bundles, they're AAA investments. That means pension funds can invest in them. So pensions all across the country invested in these mortgage bundles, and then the fraud collapsed, and they were all defunded. But in this country, you're not allowed to criticize the banking class. So now you have all these pensions saying, you people are just expecting too much. You're living too long. Really, I mean, the patriotic thing you ought to do is simply die the day after you no longer have your job and get out of the way here. CalPERS is slashing their pension payments to retirees in 2 more California towns by up to 90%. Now, if you've done any financial planning for your retirement and all of a sudden your pension is cut to just 1/10 of what you were expecting it to be, you know you're going to be in trouble. The Sacramento Bee is pointing on out public workers in Trinity and Imperial counties are just the latest to have their pensions slashed by up to 90% as their cities admit what most of us have known for some time. Namely, that they're running Ponzi schemes which simply don't have the funding required to pay out the benefits they've promised. The way a pension fund is supposed to work, and this also applies to Social Security, is your money gets sent on in and they invest it for you for a positive return that builds up over time so that when you retire, you have the money you paid in plus the benefit of the investments. But Social Security basically got used as a slush fund for pork barrel projects, and they got into the habit of paying out the benefits to the retirees by the Social Security taxes paid by the younger workers, which works fine as long as your economy is growing and there's a growing population of new workers who all have jobs. But all of a sudden, when you're in a nation where you've got almost 100 million Americans who are willing and able to work, and they're not working, they're not able to find jobs for months or years, then those Social Security taxes fall short, and they're getting into trouble. And that's what's happening to these pension funds. And nobody has the gonadal tissue to stand up and point the finger of blame at Wall Street and say, you guys messed up. You committed a fraud for which you should have gone to jail for, and instead the American people were looted to try and cover some of the damage. And for those pension funds, the damage is being dropped on the people that are dependent on the pension fund, the pensioners. It's really a shameful situation. Now, the apparent flip-flop by the president on the immigration issue has prompted backlash from some of his most vocal supporters. Ann Coulter wondering aloud at this point who doesn't want Trump impeached. But yeah, Trump is backtracking on most of his campaign promises. We're up to our neck in more wars. Now he seems to be getting on board with this idea of, as long as Congress passes it, I'll sign it to have the illegals stay on. Here we are, September. He's been in the job for a little over 8 months. He campaigned on exposing Hillary and putting her in jail. And she's now out on the book tour. Clearly unafraid of being arrested. And yes, I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. I would still support him against Hillary Clinton, should that circumstance happen yet again. But I'm disappointed in him. But I'm disappointed in the entire government as a whole that has so obviously broken free of the will of the American people. Because you go back and you read that Constitution of the United States of America. This country was set up so that ultimately the will of the people is the law of the land. Not the will of the narcocracy, not the will of George Soros, not the will of the bankers. This country was supposed to be run for the benefit of all Americans and the nation itself. Not for the benefit of Israel, not for the benefit of the medical industrial complex, not for the benefit of the war profiteers. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the House of Representatives has passed legislation that would make membership in a criminal gang grounds for deportation. The bill is called the Criminal Alien Gang Member Removal Act. It passed the House 233 to 175. There were still 175 members of the House of Representatives, I'm presuming liberal Democrats, who want these MS-13 gang members to have the run of the streets in the United States of America. And they're willing to put up with all the drugs and violence by MS-13 because of that vision eventually of a one planet, one government world where everything is just going to be hunky-dory. And no, it won't. Look at the trend throughout history. The larger an empire becomes, the more abusive of its subjugated populations it will be. So if you have a global tyranny, it will be the most autocratic tyranny in all of history. It can't help but not to be. Apparently over in Bavaria, lovely part of Germany, Bavaria, I enjoyed it immensely, but apparently the number of rape attacks in Bavaria has gone up 91% this year. Now the overall rape has increased by 48%, but 91% of that increase are the migrants. And this is one of the reasons why the German people are very upset with Angela Merkel. And Angela Merkel is now talking like she's rethinking the open borders as she campaigns for another term as chancellor. And I'm presuming that the German people are going to be smart enough that she's simply pandering to them, and that if she wins re-election, she'll be back on board with the globalist New World Order agenda, and we're going to open the borders. Huzzah, huzzah. Now, over in Spain, tensions are rising between Spain's government and Catalonia's government over the upcoming independence referendum. And Madrid is out there, basically they've ordered the police to seize all the election materials, all the ballots, all the ballot boxes. They're threatening to arrest any mayor who favors independence. And now Madrid is saying they're going to seize control of all of the Catalonia government's finances to stop this vote from happening. And again, this is a violation of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It really is very obvious, this allegiance to a one-world government is really dominating politics all over the globe. And it is rather sad that along the way, the rights of individuals are just being ignored. They are just being absolutely ignored in this desire for a one-world government. and it's not really very realistic. There's lots of good arguments against it. But people are just caught up with this vision of a one planet, one government world. And they've convinced themselves that it will be a utopia. No, it won't. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've allowed, in this country, the presidency to become too powerful. So it attracts people who are willing to do anything to get that power, and once they get it, they're equally willing to do anything with it. Same thing with Congress. The same will be true with a one world government. That golden throne of planet Earth will attract people who are willing to do anything to sit on it, and once they're sitting on it, they'll be willing to do anything with it. It will only be a matter of time before the golden throne of planet Earth has another Pol Pot, or another Hitler, or another Bush sitting on it. And they'll be operating without any restraint whatsoever. When they start talking about the useless eaters, we should get rid of them, there's no reason for them not to move forward with that. And turn this into a world where only if you are useful to the government are you allowed to remain alive. Now, getting on back to the PC nonsense, a professor from the University of Rhode Island has published an article that is calling for placing more books with transgender or gender fluid protagonists in preschool libraries. Now, this professor is claiming this would allow transgender children to feel understood, validated, and respected for who they are. Kids in preschool aren't even thinking in those terms. Their gender is basically based on the plumbing. And you have to wonder how many of these individuals who claim they're transgender are just making that claim because it's the new trendy, fashionable thing to do. I think I mentioned yesterday there was this the guy who just said, I'm transgender, I want to be a woman, and he went through the surgery and the hormone treatments, and surprise, surprise, it did not make his life any better, and now he wants to go back. Now, all the way back in 1969, on November the 4th, there was a New York Times feature article authored by Gladwin Hill that called for the deliberate addition of sterilizing chemicals to be added to the food supply in order to achieve globalist goals of human depopulation. Remember what I said about Kissinger's National Security Study 200? I understand that there is a human population problem. There always will be, because sex is a lot more fun than dying. The problem I have is that everybody out there championing the cause of human depopulation always wants somebody else, preferably in other countries, to die or go without children. They certainly do not make the sacrifice themselves. And I don't think anybody should be allowed to have the power of deciding who dies and who lives, who is allowed to have children and who is not. Now, over in San Diego, they've got a hepatitis A outbreak. It's killed 16 people. A lot more have been infected. And it seems that this hepatitis A came across the border with a bunch of the illegals and refugees. And so it is so out of control. The city of San Diego is literally spraying all of the streets in the city with bleach to try and kill this pathogen. Now, you know those little airport backscatter machines that have made Michael Chertoff's company so rich? Apparently, the Israelis tested them and described them as total garbage. They do not actually work. In fact, if you follow the link to the article, there's a video of somebody showing you how you can get past those backscatter scanners with all kinds of metal objects on your body that will not be detected. It's not about security. It's about making more money for the people who call the shots. Michael Chertoff was head of Department of Homeland Security. He's the guy who came up with X-ray machines at the airports, swabs with the chemicals to test for explosives, the rubber gloves, and all this other stuff. And once it was in place, he retired from his government service and he started a company, the Chertoff Group, that makes their money selling all of this stuff to the airports. And he's laughing all the way to the bank here. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Kath in Vermont. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike.
Yes.
We both started Medicare last month.
Yes.
So I've never called in a radio show before, and I listened to you on podcast. So the reason why I called was I could not let this week end without speaking about the coincidence of dates and numerology with the elites. And September 12th was the day that Hillary and her idiot publisher decided to do something that I thought was just totally sick, with total disregard and cruelty to Ambassador Christopher Stevens' family.
Yeah.
And I have an excerpt. I don't know if anyone spoke about it, but I have an excerpt from a letter that his cousin, who was a U.S. Navy chaplain, wrote. And out of respect for, and out of disgust for Hillary usurping September 12th as her day, could I just read a little bit of this letter?
Yes, but you're going to have to rush because we've only got about a minute and a half till the commercial break.
Oh, can I be held?
All right, I'll hold you over into the final segment of the hour. But go ahead and start now.
Okay. Out of respect for my cousin, I'm not going to be specific about his murder. However, Ambassador Stevens was brutally murdered. His genitals were cut off. He was sodomized and beaten and cut and stabbed and burned. He was dragged through the streets and left for dead. This is eyewitnesses' testimony of a local doctor who found the ambassador in a ditch and tried to save his life. He had no idea who he was.
Okay.
The next week, I drove my aunt and uncle and two others to D.C. to receive his body. We met Hillary, Panetta, and Susan Rice, all of whom apologized and said it was a protest gone bad over a video and excited the area. Next, Obama entered with the same story and didn't apologize and wasn't sympathetic. My aunt cried to this man, and all he did was hand her flowers and walk away. I tried to get his attention, but didn't. I got upset, and I yelled, "Liar," to him. He kept walking. Then a Secret Service agent grabbed my arm and led me to a room where I was held till the proceedings were over. America, I saw firsthand how cold this man is, what kind of liar he is. Most of you haven't a clue about this tyrant, and yet you support him and act like every word he says is gospel. These murders and the last Fast and Furious cover-ups make Watergate look like a kid who told his best friends the secret to the class. And
okay, we're going to have to take that break right now, so stay on the phone. I'll come back to you. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're finishing up with Kath, and we're going to try and squeeze in a couple more calls before the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. So, Kath, finish reading your letter. Kath, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
I'm very, very shaky, but with the Clinton body count, you know, how many emails and telephone calls did she receive? You know, and how many, once again, how many military units were told to stand down and not go? And, you know, while they're making all this money on building pipelines and the gold and everything else, it's just The FBI opened an inquiry into the attack and the circumstances of the deaths of these men, okay? They still have not released an autopsy report, which they promised. I mean, how many times do we have to hear this over and over again?
Well, we know it's a cover-up. We know it's a cover-up, okay? And we know...
I guess I was so busy finding out where the gold went on 9/11 that I must have been sick and I missed Benghazi. But I am just so furious because I know of 3 different cases where doctors were murdered within 24 hours of somebody who was killed by the elite, so that the doctor was dead within 24 hours who did the autopsy. You know, so what don't we know about Benghazi, and how could this woman and how could the publisher, on the anniversary of his death, do that to his parents and his family?
Well, because they're heartless. They're absolutely heartless. And maybe it's Hillary's way of counting coup, skin of the leopard and everything else. Anyway, Kath.
Yeah.
Okay, Kath, I got to let you go. We got a bunch of calls, and I'm trying to get through them before we get to the lovely Lady Claire. So we're going to switch over to Rob in Illinois. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
No, it's just the oligarchy we live in, huh, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah. I wanted to make input. We were talking about, I was inquiring about gold and silver coins earlier, about gold in general, and you had said that, let me just put it out this way. I listen to a lot of network radio, and Andy Gause is somebody else out there that does a lot of Erskine overnight rents. He's been in the business for gold and silver coin trading for over 25 years. And one thing he's always made a point of, back in 1934 when Roosevelt was out to seize everyone's gold, your gold and silver coins, your old coins, were exempt.
Coins of numismatic collector's value were exempt, and your personal jewelry was exempt. But investment instrument gold, that had to be turned in. Anyway, listen, Rob, we're going to have to let you go. We got to do a station identification. We're running really short on time, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. We've got one more phone call we need to take before we get into the lovely Lady Claire here, and that would be Nancy in New Jersey. Aloha, Nancy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to say that I've been watching Bitcoin and the smackdown between the fear about China closing their exchanges and Diamond coming out saying that, Bitcoin is trash. But when you look at the blockchain, which is totally open, you see that there are buyers that are coming in with millions of dollars buying up Bitcoin. So another market that they're manipulating.
I smell tulips in the air.
Highly manipulated. You got to be very careful. And then the other point I wanted to make is that when you're talking about global government, whenever I talk to people that aren't quite awake, I tell them, watch the movie Hunger Games.
Yes.
Because that series shows a lot of what they want.
Yes.
Have you watched it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very close to the kind of society that we're going to end up with if we get into a one world.
Well, there have been so many books and movies created throughout the years about what happens when you allow a government to have too much power and authority, going all the way back to Fritz Lang's Metropolis. It's something that we all collectively recognize is a danger to the general welfare of the human race, and yet these tyrants keep appearing in our midst, and it seems that we don't recognize them for what they are until it's way too late.
Yeah, it was scary, though, because it was geared towards the children to normalize them. My kids were watching it, and I wasn't paying attention, and it caught my ear, and I'm like, oh, my God. And then I watched it, and I was like, this is to normalize the youth into accepting this type of society. They glorified it.
Yes, they did.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's it.
All right, Nancy.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Same to you. And we're going to close the phone lines. And for those of you watching on BAM Music, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us on Friday, hour number 3, with her unique perspective on the world. So what's the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing that has annoyed me greatly is that 8 hours ago, Israeli minister threatens war with Syria over Iranian presence in the country. Aiea Shaked, the justice minister, I have to laugh at that, forgive me, but I'll go on, of Israel, has just threatened the Syrian government, stating that Israel will do what is necessary if Syrian President Bashar al-Assad does not keep Iran out of Syria.
And then, of course, we got Nikki Haley up there at the UN saying, going on back and saying that the United States will never accept a Syria with Assad as the leader. So they're fanning this thing back up again.
They're tag teaming here.
Yep.
And the Israeli government, who last week bombed a Syrian military outpost, killing 2 soldiers, has now verbally challenged the Syrian government in the form of offering an ultimatum, Mike. The threats towards Syria come at a time when the Assad government forces have all but extinguished the presence of Daesh in Syria and are coming close to completely ending the war. Israel, meanwhile, seem to be having an anxiety attack over the current situation and have been beating hard on the drums of war. Now, in their Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's most recent visit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, I believe, at Sochi, he frequently sought to voice his concerns over Iran. This was then, to Netanyahu's frustration, brushed under the rug by Putin as though it was viewed as a non-substantive issue. A paranoid Israeli government has meanwhile been busy preparing for war with pretty much every enemy they can conjure since that meeting took place, and they don't seem to be very happy with the way things are turning out in Syria, with the strengthening of the axis of resistance.
Well, basically what it is Netanyahu backed the wrong side in the Syrian conflict.
Yep.
And it is as much a defeat for Israel as it is for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Israel is now attacking into Syria. And Nikki Haley is out there saying that, if the UN doesn't go along with us to get rid of Assad, we're just going to have to go it alone. So once again, the U.S. is going rogue.
Yep.
And Nikki Haley's job is apparently to just browbeat the United Nations into going along with the U.S. war agenda.
Not only the U.S.-Israeli war agenda.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, okay. The Israeli military has now notably brought its long series of military drills, which included a simulated invasion of Lebanon, to a halt. Now, this was Israel's biggest military drill since 1998, where they simulated an invasion of Syria. For any other country, such a drill as the one they started on the 5th of this month would be seen as a possible threat to national security and/or a provocation of war for the country being threatened. However, Israel just seems to be able to do this whilst coming under no scrutiny from the international media nor the international community.
Well, the NATO's getting away with the same thing. They've got all those troops and weapons along the border with Russia, and nobody is out there saying it's a provocation. It's just, in fact, they're talking about Russia having military drills on their own territory as sign of Russian ill will.
And aggression.
We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And back to Claire.
Okay. Apparently, the UK terror threat has been raised to critical, and that only happens in the UK when it's believed by their intelligence, MI5, MI6, that another terrorist attack may be imminent. I feel so badly for the people who got hit and hurt. I mean, my heart and prayers go out to them. Be strong. Hopefully, family and friends can be there for them to support them as they go through their convalescence from whatever injury they got by being hit by this thing.
Well, apparently all the injuries were minor, and when you're looking at the videotape of the remains of the bucket bomb, there's very little scorching. I think it was a fizzle. I don't know what they were intending this bucket bomb to do, but to me, it looks like it fizzled, and it made a loud noise, and some people had some minor injuries, but I don't think it went the way the planners intended it to go.
Well, you say minor, but you still have the component of trauma these people have gone through getting hit in this kind of an environment. And, I think it was, even though the injuries could have been a lot worse, even to the point of life-threatening, it's still very traumatic when all of a sudden something flashbangs and, heads into your skin.
Well, and I'm not trying to minimize or trivialize what these people have been through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm simply looking at the indications of minor injuries and the lack of damage to the rail car itself as indicating that whatever that was in this bucket bomb, it just was not very powerful at all, which means either it was just a bad design or it was executed poorly. But given the volume of the bucket, had there been a real high precip explosive in there, it probably would have killed everybody in the rail car.
Yeah.
So to me, something went wrong, and they didn't get the big bang that they really wanted.
Yeah. Now, apparently, the UN is going to do something that I think is not bad at all. Apparently, the UN is going to list companies linked to illegal settlements in occupied Palestine to be published despite Israeli and U.S. pressure. According to a report published Tuesday by Israel's Channel 2, the full list will be published in December and will include some of the biggest firms in the Israeli industry as well as major U.S. companies, a translation of the report from Times of Israel said. Some of the international companies on the list reportedly include Coca-Cola, TripAdvisor, Airbnb, Priceline, and Caterpillar, in addition to Israeli companies such as pharmaceutical giant Teva, the national phone Bezek, bus company Egged, the national water company Mekarot, and the country's two largest banks, Hapoalim and Leumi. And the list was recently delivered to the Foreign Ministry, the report said. And last year, the UN Rights Council passed a resolution to support forming a database of all countries conducting business in illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. And as I said, it was very fiercely opposed by, of course, the two usual suspects, the U.S. and Israel. And Mike, what I say about this is good.
Yes.
It's darn well time for some of these companies to be named and shamed.
And when that list comes on out, these are the companies that you should avoid.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're aiding and abetting Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. Now, Israel's attitude is, God said we're supposed to have all of this, and you should just go away and let us have it.
Yeah.
But again, the Palestinians' God isn't really saying the same thing to them, even though it's all supposed to be the same God going back to Abraham.
Yep.
And even some of the Israelis have said, look, they don't follow our religion. All they know is we came and we took their land, so yeah, they're going to be a little bit upset, but we don't want them to be upset. And again, Nikki Haley is just the latest in a long line of U.S. representatives to the UN whose primary job is to stand up and scream veto, 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 veto anytime the United Nations attempts to do anything to rein in the rogue nation of Israel.
Yep, that's her job, all right.
Yep.
Whatever AIPAC is paying her, it cannot possibly be enough.
Oh, AIPAC's not going to pay her. She's being paid out of U.S. taxpayer funds.
Well, I would imagine there's probably a little Israeli on the side, an AIPAC on the side.
Maybe they got negatives on her or something.
Who knows? There is a really tense situation coming up in Iraq. And what's happening right now, the Iraqi parliament votes to remove Kirkuk governor from office. And they voted Thursday to remove the governor of Kirkuk from office following a request from Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, according to several lawmakers who attended the vote. The decision to remove the governor, Najmuddin Karim, comes after Kirkuk, the oil-rich province claimed by both the central government in Baghdad and the autonomous Kurdish region in northern Iraq, decided to take part in a referendum scheduled for the 25th of this month on Kurdish independence.
Well,
now,
I can see why Baghdad would want to get him out of the office as quickly as possible.
But we also have the following troubling headline, again from antiwar.com, regarding the very fractious and fragile state of Iraq. Iraqi Kurd president says ties with Baghdad are cut over sacking of Kirkuk governor. So, Mike, this is what I'm trying to get my head around. When this comes to a military dust-up between the Kurds and the Iraqs over what has been traditionally Iraqi soil since 1923, where does the U.S. government come in, and how do they back the Kurds without causing a civil war between the Kurds and the Iraqis over this? And I think the short answer is they can't.
Well, they can't be.
Yeah.
They might go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah.
At the risk of alienating their own puppet rulers of Iraq.
Yeah.
But this again, it wasn't well thought out.
Nope.
It wasn't planned very well. The quality of thinking coming out of Washington D.C. is absolutely abysmal, and you have to wonder if it is just too much lead pipes in those buildings, too many antidepressants, or is it really, as Steve Bannon said, when you get right down to it, these people just aren't really very bright.
Yeah.
He was commenting about that regarding Hillary Clinton. Then you go back and you look at all the president's men and how that Deep Throat was saying about all the people around Richard Nixon. Says, forget what you've heard about them being the best and the brightest. The fact is they're not very sharp. They're in these positions of power because they're willing to do things moral people will not. They're willing to do the dirty work, and they think that makes them a superior human being. Yeah. And generally it doesn't. And you will find that the people who are trying to better their careers by simply being a hatchet man for somebody above them are people who can't make it on their own talents and skills, meaning that by default, these are not very bright people.
Yeah.
And looking at how they keep making these monstrous goofs, one after the other, after the other, after the other, you have to wonder about just what is the real brain trust in Washington, D.C. Now, all of these top people, they claim to have IQs of 140 and 160, but between the inherent inaccuracy of IQ tests and it being very, very subjective, I think it's just more PR. Yes, I gave this much to charity and I have a high IQ and, I'm big and tough. It may just be another exaggeration to try and convince you that you should just go along with what these people want because they have a high IQ. And by the way, that is a very common feature of people who do have a high IQ, which is why I quit Mensa. Because of all these people who thought the world owed them something because they had more marbles than the people around them. I found that very, very upsetting.
Very distasteful. What I'm thinking here is that those government agencies will figure out that there is going to be a new civil war on Iraq's hands, and it may ensure a more permanent and muscular U.S. troop strength here. Because Muqtada al-Sadr, I haven't heard from recently, remember?
Yes.
But hey, at the end of the day, this is really all about the incredible embarrassment of riches in Kirkuk's oil. Who controls it is of no real interest to the deep state in America as long as the U.S. gets to ensure that all the oil is controlled by U.S.-centric corporations and only sold for the U.S. dollar.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely.
Now, I read, again, in antiwar.com, which I commend to you. It's a very sober and intelligent blog. Now, this is something that T-Rex Tillerson said in a meeting in the UK. The U.S. must consider broader Iran threats when formulating new strategy. And that's what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said on Thursday, adding that Iran had breached the spirit of a 2015 nuclear deal.
Well, see, that's how they're getting around the fact that the IAEA is saying that Iran is totally in compliance with the requirements of the P5+1 deal. The new point is Iran is breaching the spirit of the deal.
Yeah, well, let me get on to that just a little bit later. Tillerson made the comments during a visit to Britain to see Prime Minister Theresa May and Foreign Minister Boris Johnson. The trip was billed as focusing on the relief after Hurricane Irma, how to respond to North Korea's nuclear test, and resolving the political deadlock in Libya. Good luck on that. But he was outspoken in his criticism of Iran when asking whether he believed it was meeting the obligations of a 2015 international nuclear agreement designed to curb an Iranian nuclear program in return for lifting most Western sanctions. Tillerson cited the preface of the nuclear deal, which calls on Iran to contribute positively to regional security. And I have to ask, Secretary Tillerson, have you gone absolutely and completely barking mad in making these accusations against Iran? Because, Mike, they utterly defy logic.
No, not when you look at it from his point of view. Iran has been contributing to regional security.
Yes.
They're in there trying to stabilize things in Syria, but from the U.S. point of view, that means opposition.
Right.
And what Rex Tillerson views this requirement to maintain positive stability in the region is you back down and let us invade whoever we want to invade. And I guess that is the rationale behind their claim that Iran had breached the spirit of the P5+1 nuclear deal.
And I want to ask him to please articulate the meaning of this accusation using Mr. Tongue and Mr. Lips, because, Mike, as far as I can see, there's no there. It is a speciously meaningless accusation. And to what specific allegations is he referring regarding their malicious use of cyber activities? Tillerson makes this allegation as though the USA and the NSA aren't doing this kind of action 24/7 against countries we don't very much like.
Well, he's playing to the same people who are still believing that Russia hacked the DNC emails in the election itself. Yeah. And again, they're not really concerned with proving what they're saying. Most propaganda is aimed at people who don't really want to think about what's going on. Because they don't want to face up to the reality that their government has gone rogue, that their government is evil, and they'll gratefully embrace any bit of propaganda that comes along that allows them to live their lives of self-deception, saying, I'm a good person in a good country, and everybody else hates us, and as long as it's not my kid, we can go make war on them. The fact of the matter is, most propaganda is not really engineered to survive a close examination.
Right.
And again, a classic example of that was the allegation that Assad was gassing his own people at Idlib.
Oh, please.
And the U.S. government issued that as if it was a fact, and you're disloyal if you question it. The corporate media came on out and stated it as a fact, but it never made any sense.
No, it didn't. And to go on a little bit, the world knows that Israel has been cheerleading for regime change in Tehran for a very long time. But I'm hoping that Tillerson thinks seriously of the broader implications of such a U.S. preemptive war against Iran. And the thing
we have to take a break for our commercials,
Alrighty.
And we will be right back.
Okay.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, take it away.
I'm remarking on the statements made by Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State. And the one thing that he doesn't quite understand yet, and I don't know why he doesn't get it, Israel wants regime change in Tehran, but only at the cost of American blood and American money.
Well, you can't expect Israel to risk their precious children.
And there's another aspect to this which I don't think the Trump administration has thought through. What is Russia going to do when the U.S. invades Iran? Is the Duma going to hold hands and collectively sing the Russian equivalent of Kumbaya? I don't think so, Mike, particularly in light of the reality that the Russian military and civilian leadership have stated time and again that should Iran be attacked, Russia will come to its aid militarily. And I can't believe the Trump administration is really contemplating a war with Russia over Iran.
No. They're contemplating a war with Russia over the ruble. Iran is just an excuse.
Yeah, Iran is just there. I would, and at the end of this comment on Tillerson's comments, I would sincerely like to believe that these remarks about Iran were spoken for foreign rather than domestic consumption, plumbing the depths of what the UK might be ready to do in participating in a U.S. attack against Iran. Because if this man believes for 1 millisecond that he has brought the American people on board for a war against Iran with these stupid accusations, which have utterly no basis in fact, when we have been lied to so many times about the reasons for the wars in Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq, he is really, really badly mistaken.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
We're tired of war.
Yeah.
We're burned out on it. The thrill is gone.
Had it up to here.
Yes.
Moving on.
Yes.
There has been a report that 389,000 Rohingyas have fled Myanmar in the last 3 weeks. Things are getting very ugly for them. Rohingya Muslims who've crossed over from Myanmar into Bangladesh. There's an image, heartbreaking image, of two younger men carrying an older woman in a basket and walk toward the refugee camp in Shah Paurir Bangladesh. And it's nearly 3 weeks into a mass exodus of Rohingya fleeing violence in Myanmar. Thousands were still flooding across the border Thursday in search of help and safety. And, Bangladesh is not a country with a really flowing, established aid program, and I don't know that they're going to get much help here either.
No, they're still struggling economically. Well, the big question is, these Rohingya Muslims, what mineral wealth were they living over that somebody felt that it was necessary to come on in and drive them out of their homes?
Yeah, and I have a paired article with that. Myanmar's military political leaders are now united against the Rohingya as a threat. Now, they've been living in Myanmar for hundreds of years, and apparently Foreign Minister Aung San Suu Kyi and the military that long kept her party out of power seem to be on the same page as international attention on the country shifts from its past troubles to the ongoing Rohingya crisis. Now, these Rohingya are mostly ethnic Muslim, but include a Hindu minority, and these are all stateless people, denied citizenship under Myanmar law. This puts them in a very difficult position where Myanmar's ruling NLD party considers them illegal immigrants. But by and large, they aren't from anywhere else. Now, as you and I talked earlier this morning when I was putting this article together, the Human Rights Watch is many things, but generally stupid and sloppy with their statistics. They are not. And what they have shared with the rest of the world, they have presented satellite data indicating burnings of the Rohingya state. And Burma, they sort of use Myanmar and Burma, which was the old name for the country, sort of interchangeably. They have evidence that the military has torched homes near the border. And they're asking the question, does Myanmar violence account as human rights crimes? And I would like to politely remind Aung San Suu Kyi that when she was under house arrest in Myanmar, it was the Human Rights Watch championing for her cause.
All right, we're going to put a hold right there. Yeah. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're just now getting word. Apparently, Tillerson is now asking, or rather, senators are asking Tillerson to now expel the Cuban diplomats. Remember, we were seeing this warming of relations. We were going to go back to being friends with Cuba. We were going to get Cuban rum and Cuban cigars, and it was all going to be really good. And now they literally are dragging us back to the world of the 1950s and 1960s. Cuba's the enemy, Russia's the enemy, China's the enemy, and it's just absurd. Anyway, your next story.
I just want to go back and comment on this. There have been several American government officials who have been sickened by some sort of sonic attack, whatever this is.
Well, that's the claim that was being made.
Yeah.
Okay, but I've seen no actual evidence for it. It's like Saddam's nukes or Assad's sarin gas. And let me reposition your microphone just a little tiny bit. There we are.
All right.
Okay, and I think it's just more propaganda to justify this hardening position of the United States. The U.S. wants to wall off our country from the rest of the world, physically and even on the Internet, so that you will be forced to accept their propaganda as to why your children should continue to march off and be killed and crippled in all these wars all over the world.
That's more than a little disappointing. I'd like to go now to Afghanistan. Apparently, we now have another deployment of 6,000 U.S. troops for Afghanistan. Now, this adds on to the previously deployed and planned 3,500 troop escalation already announced for the Afghan war. Officials are now reporting that another 6,000 plus, we don't know how many the plus is, ground troops from Fort Carson are also slated for a future deployment to the country. And it's part of the increasingly complicated way in which the U.S. reports, or rather doesn't report, on troop levels and details in its ongoing wars. The report on the Fort Carson troops includes a lot of questions, including timing, how many are new deployments as opposed to replacing existing troops, simply rotating out of the country. Those are pretty big questions, and there are no simple answers. The Pentagon isn't officially confirming any of the details on this matter, and while those familiar say the deployment is likely to happen sometime in early 2018, even that date is just a speculation. So, SecDef Mattis, a word, please. In this 16-year-old war, where there have been episodic surges and drawdowns, how in the name of heaven will this time be different? And I think, Mike, the American people honestly deserve an intelligent, reasoned answer to this question from its leadership. And I would like to politely remind SecDef Mattis that doing something precisely the same way over and over again, and yet expecting a different outcome, is one of the classical definitions of insanity.
No, it's Einstein's definition. Well, what's going on here is there are still a lot of countries on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list, including ultimately Russia and China. And it is very important to continue this war agenda that the U.S. not be seen as losing anywhere. And so pouring all these troops into Afghanistan, they may not win, but the goal is to simply not appear like they have lost and withdrawn. And for the U.S. government, this is a perfectly reasonable reason to take your children from you and throw them into Afghanistan to be killed and crippled. The same thing is apparently what's about to happen in Syria, where pretty much observers around the world said this war is over, and it does represent a defeat for the U.S. that wanted to oust Assad. And then all of a sudden we have Israel is attacking Syria. Nikki Haley's up at the UN saying we will not accept Syria with Assad in charge. And so the goal here is not necessarily to win, because they haven't been. Not after 16 years in Afghanistan, and not after, 6 now in Syria. But the goal is to simply not look like they're losing, no matter how many millions of American children have to be killed in the process.
Yeah. Speaking of war and the funding for it, the House is backing a $1.2 trillion spending bill with more money for the military. The Republican-led House on Thursday passed a sweeping $1.2 million spending bill.
Trillion,
with a T. With a T. That provides billions more dollars for the military while sparing medical research and popular community development programs from deep cuts sought by President Donald Trump. The vote was 211 to 198 for the massive measure that wrapped the 12 annual spending bills into one in advance of the end of the budget year on September 30th. Even though the Senate must still act, the government will keep operating through December 8th, thanks to legislation Congress passed last week and sent to Trump. House members spent the last 2 weeks debating the measure's $500 billion for domestic agencies. GOP leaders then merged that domestic spending with an earlier House measure that would give record budget increases to the Pentagon and provide a $1.6 billion down payment for Trump's wall along the U.S.-Mexico border that he has repeatedly insisted Mexico would finance. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And looking at all of this money flowing so freely to the U.S. military, the translation I have for this bill is that it funds present and future wars of aggression to control as far as possible the tangible wealth of the entire planet to which this country has absolutely no moral right.
Now, if you go back and you look at those numbers very carefully, what it's telling you is Congress is spending twice as much of your money on war as it does spending on you. That's obviously where their priority is right now.
Right. And President Trump has, again, extended the post-9/11 state of emergency. He has become the third president over the course of the 16 consecutive years to extend the temporary state of national emergency, which was imposed in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks. The state of emergency gives the president considerable leeway to pass legal limits surrounding the military and use of National Guard and Reserve troops. Exactly how much this power is used is itself unclear, as presidents have for years ignored a legal requirement to offer reports to Congress every 6 months on the matter. Now, officially, Presidents Bush, Obama, and now Trump have defended the extension on the grounds that terrorism still exists and it is still a thing. Logically speaking, however, the emergency declaration was intended to give the president flexibility until Congress had time to act after 9/11. Now, Mike, to me, it was painfully predictable from a president who steadfastly believes that war is good for business and that perpetual war is the only way for the occupied, unhinged surveil states of America to maintain its financial hegemony.
Well, they're trying to do that.
Yep.
They're failing miserably, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to understand these states of emergencies are the mechanism by which presidents have acquired more personal power and authority, taking it away from the Congress, taking it away from the Supreme Court. And Congress and the Supreme Court should have intervened long before now. But when coming into the White House, most presidents are going to just renew the ongoing states of emergency, some of which go back to Franklin Roosevelt.
Yep.
And they are designed to basically make the president an all-powerful autocrat, which was never the plan in the original Constitution. Congress was supposed to make all the laws. The president had the power of veto, but unless he vetoed, his power and authority was limited to executing the will of the Congress. That's why it's called the executive branch. But unfortunately, presidents have started using these executive orders, which, by the way, do not actually exist in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And technically would only have authority over the executive branch itself to simply say, you know, I'm the tyrant, forget Congress. And we do seem to be seeing a growing battle between the executive branch and Congress over who's really running the country.
Yep.
More and more people are really starting to think that the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies are the true power in this country.
And there are a lot of examples which would indicate that that is very possibly right now the case. I mean, we've got President Trump in there and his 3 president whisperers. That would be Kelly, that would be Mattis, and McMasters.
Yes.
And they are very carefully filtering out any information that doesn't fit their agenda.
Well, we know the CIA lied to Trump when they claimed they had absolute ironclad proof that Assad had in fact gassed his own people at Idlib, even though nobody could come up with a reason why he would do something that stupid at that particular point in time, when he's winning the war against the terrorists, and the rest of the world was starting to accept the political reality of Syria continuing with Assad on top. Then all of a sudden there's this gas attack. The CIA lies to Donald Trump and says, we absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt Assad did it. Trump sends in the cruise missiles, and this whole thing is kicked up in high gear again. And now we've got Nikki Haley at the UN saying we absolutely refuse to accept Syria continuing with Assad in control, and if the UN doesn't agree with us, we're just ready to go it alone.
That is some of the most scary language I have heard from her, and I get very concerned about her language at the UN, very, very much, because you're looking at a situation, Mike, where Russia has entrenched itself militarily into Syria.
Yes.
It's got good entrenchment there. And if the U.S. goes off and picks a fight with Syria where we're looking at direct head-to-head combat with either Syrian or Russian military, this is going to be a mess. This is going to be nasty.
It's going to be another Vietnam. It's already another Vietnam. So is Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's just dragging on forever. And again, it is obviously the point of view of the Pentagon and the war hawks that the U.S. cannot be seen to lose any of these wars, or it will derail the rest of the war agenda, which ends up with war against Russia and China.
Yep.
And so they may not be able to say they're winning in Syria or Afghanistan, but as long as they keep pouring on troops and money all over those places, they'll be able to say, well, at least we're not losing.
Yeah, that
we
seems
remain
to be
undefeated.
Yeah, that seems to be the mindset. But, you know, I am very concerned that Syria could very well be Donald Trump's Vietnam, if he persists.
It's going to be somebody's Vietnam.
Yeah. Because Russia doesn't feel it can or will back down to this regime change. Because the United States has just been pretty darn autocratic about saying, government, clunk, gotta go. This guy has to go. This guy has to go.
Yes.
And the reasons are all economic. They don't have to do with geopolitics at all. Saddam Hussein started selling his oil in currencies other than the U.S. dollar. Gotta go.
In the euro.
In the euro. Same thing with
Gaddafi.
Same thing. It was economic. Karl Marx, there were a few things he said with which I would disagree mightily, but when he started to talk about all wars being economic, the guy was right spot on.
He was absolutely right on. Do you know when the U.S. first started talking about regime change in Syria, was at the exact same time Assad said, we think we're going to drop using the dollar. That's really what it was here.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to take a phone call?
Sure.
All right, we'll take a phone call here. Rob in Manhattan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It is a pleasure to talk to you, and greetings to Claire as well.
Hi.
You share a birthday. You and Michael share a birthday with my girlfriend, and Michael Jackson.
And Michael Jackson. Well, that blows that whole astrology thing out of the water because I can't dance, and I don't like little boys.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I actually disagree with you about something.
Okay.
I think I saw the press conference when he talked about Assad, gassing little babies and all that, and I thought he was lying. I voted for Trump. You understand? I voted for Trump. I'm disappointed about lots of things. Probably Syria more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I hear
Syria
you.
more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just of all the. But when I saw him in that press conference, I didn't believe him. I didn't believe he believed what he was saying.
Well,
and,
that may be true, but however it's come about, he has been compromised, and he's under control. He's collared, he's corralled, whatever euphemism or metaphor you wish to use.
He's turned.
He's turned.
Yeah.
And he's serving that narcocracy, that deep state. Maybe they threatened his life or that of his family. But for however it's come about, Trump is now just as destructive of the American society as any of his predecessors.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, every time Nikki Haley opens my mouth, it raises her mouth. It raises my blood pressure.
Oh, I hear you on that one. I absolutely hear you.
And the problem is she doesn't think about what she's saying here, because now a lot of people are pointing out to her that her support for Israel and some of the things she said about it are actually putting Lebanon at greater risk.
Yes.
Of course, we know Israel wants to go back into Lebanon anyway because they want that Litani River.
Well, honestly, I don't think the money junkies care. I mean, I really don't. I really think that, Israel wants the Golan, and the United States wants control over the oil fields in Syria and Iraq by making a sweet deal with the Kurds. And I don't think the money junkies care. I really don't. I mean, it's not about it being thought out. It's about them having enough resources to just outlast everybody else. There's no thought in this. They're just not going to quit until they win. And that's really the most discouraging thing about this whole thing.
Well, the fact that they're not thinking these things through very carefully is why they may well fail. Because, they may be insanely rich, but if they're stupid and they're making mistakes, then sooner or later they're going to open themselves up in a vulnerable way where their enemies will be able to take them down despite the disparity in wealth.
Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, it really has to do with the judgment and patience of the Russians, to be honest with you, because, what they're doing. I mean, at what point in time are the Russians going to allow, the Kurds and us and the Turks and the Israelis to take off little chunks of Syria?
Well, I know. Ultimately, Putin does not want war with the U.S., and neither does China, but I think they're realizing appeasement does not work. It certainly didn't work in the days of Neville Chamberlain, and they're realizing that they're back in that same situation, that war is coming no matter what they do, and the best thing that they can do right now is to go ahead and prepare for that war, even though they don't want it. Because appeasement didn't work with the Nazis, and it's not going to work with the U.S. government. And again, look at the Iraq situation. Saddam gave up his chemical weapons. He was still invaded and killed. Syria gave up their chemical weapons. The U.S. is still going on in to invade and take out Assad. And not only is North Korea very much aware of that, so is Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Rob, we're going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our Pauhana Friday show after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Don't call into the show. The lines are closed right now, and I don't know why that bump is in that last slot anyway. So this is the last segment of our Pauhana Friday program, and Claire, you had another story.
Yes, I do, and I think it's very significant. Apparently, Saudi Arabia has cracked down on dissenting clerics amid rumors of Crown Prince's rise to the throne. And a trio of prominent clerics last weekend, a sign that the kingdom may be preparing for the formal ascendance of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, who is a key decision-maker on the country's domestic and international affairs, but technically subservient to his father, King Salman. Salman al-Odeh, Al-Wad al-Qarni, and Allah al-Omari were arrested with very little explanation over why, but activists suspect that their failures to follow MBS's hawkish line on Qatar played a role in their imprisonment. And human rights activists have told the Wall Street Journal that al-Odeh's arrest came after he declined to come out in support of the Saudi government's action against Qatar. And Saudi, by the way, is threatening a military invasion of Qatar. And on September 8th, al-Odeh tweeted a pretty vanilla message hoping for reconciliation between the kingdom and Qatar. May God harmonize between their hearts for the good of their people. That doesn't seem terribly nasty or negative. But I've got to tell you, it looks like the bloodlust of the Saudi warlord and butcher of Yemen, Prince Salman, is pushing him again over the edge, and very soon will declare war against Qatar.
Well, there's a question there.
Yeah.
Is this of his own doing and will, or is Saudi Arabia once again being used as a U.S. proxy for a military operation, which is going to be very, very unpopular to the American people? Now, remember, Saudi Arabia got seriously hurt in that misguided oil price war that was directed at Russia.
Yeah.
They've actually had to start borrowing money for the first time in
ever.
First time in ever. Because they had enough oil wealth to keep them going. Now they're selling government bonds, they're falling into debt, and of course whoever owns that debt owns Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And again, Saudi Arabia may be operating under the theory that invading Qatar and taking their wealth will allow them to pay off the Saudi debts and break free of the bankers. There could be promises of assistance or other emoluments, if you will, from the U.S. government directly to the future King Mohammed bin Salman.
But what makes me scratch my head, Mike, is I know that there is one of the biggest U.S. military installations in the Middle East in Qatar. So if Saudi goes ahead and attacks, what happens to these people, these soldiers and staff in Qatar?
Well, I would imagine that they would be directed to simply fortify their position and hold on to it. Obviously, Qatar would see them as a way to gain leverage over the U.S., so we might see a fight around the outside of that bases as well. If they were really concerned about all of those military personnel in Qatar, they would have started airlifting them out of the way by now. So unfortunately, I think all of those people who are on that base in Qatar are being set up to be sacrificial lambs and future bloody shirts to be waved in calling for more war across the Middle East. Okay, there's the music time for Claire and I to get on out of here. Have yourselves a really good weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned for John Stadtmiller's program. He's got lots of things to share with you. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.